to sleep. But then the covers shifted, and she peeked out from behind her silk sleep mask. "Will you take care of Jenna tonight? I don't want her coming in here and bothering me." The words cut Dani in a way that almost bent her over. She so wished she had the power to do something about Jenna's mother. That was the only worry she had about her upcoming move from Montana to New York. She would be leaving her niece on her own, and this request wasn't uncommon in the girl's life. Dani had never understood why Michelle had decided to conceive if she didn't want to be a mother. "Sure," she nodded, even though Michelle had already disappeared back under the covers. "I'll make sure we do something quiet once we're back at the house." Everything about that sentence bothered Dani. She shouldn't have to keep Jenna quiet. She shouldn't have to take care of Jenna. If Michelle were a decent human being, she'd have an actual interest in seeing her own daughter grow up. But so far, that didn't seem to be the case. What Gabe had ever seen in his wife, Dani had no idea, or any sense as to why he continuously put up with her. Dani backed out of the room, pulling the door silently shut as she exited, then shoved her tactless thoughts out of her mind. She checked her email as she hurried back down the stairs, one hand holding the phone up in front of her as the other slid along the stair rail. There were 5 emails from local marketing clients, 3 more from potential clients she simply didn't have the time to take on, and 1 from San Francisco. Similar to the marketing firm she'd be joining in New York City next month, she'd done freelance work with the San Francisco company for the last 3 years. She hated the thought of giving up any of her clients, especially considering the potential attached to the one in San Francisco. But the contract she'd be signing with her new employer would force her to do just that. Not to mention, she'd likely have 0 time left over for anything else. She had to prove herself when she got to New York. That was priority number 1. She stopped by the kitchen to scoop up the cupcakes and clothes, then headed out the back door. Peering across the field, she wondered if her brother was within cell service, and couldn't help letting her gaze hang on the Salish Mountains on the far side of Flathead Lake. She'd lived in Montana her entire life, except for the 8 weeks of freshman year at Columbia University. She'd made it to New York City briefly, and she would do it again. She'd miss this place, of course, a lot, but New York was her dream. She had to do it, if not for herself, then for her mother. Not seeing any sign of her brother, she settled the desserts into her car before sliding behind the wheel. She dialed his cell as she turned the vehicle around and headed down the long drive. "Yeah?" Gabe always answered as if he had no time to talk. "Michelle's in bed. I'm taking the cupcakes to the school." He didn't reply at first, then grunted out a single, "Thanks." "You know she eventually has to do these things herself, right? I am leaving, Gabe. In a month." She'd discussed making a permanent move to New York for so long, it had crossed her mind that her family might not believe she'd really do it. She'd been a constant for them, here for the last 14 years. But things were different now. Jaden had just graduated college. Everyone else had their own lives. They didn't need her anymore. In fact, of her 5 brothers, all younger, Gabe was the only one still at home. And that was because he ran the farm. He'd been 1 year behind her in school, and where she'd come home from college to take over responsibility for the house, he'd gone off to college to ensure he had the most up-to-date knowledge to run the farm. It had been a given since childhood that he'd one day take over for their dad, and since graduating, he'd done an incredible job. Production on the farm had increased. They now rivaled any of the other orchards running along the coast of the lake, and they'd introduced 2 new cherry varieties in the last 5 years. "I know," Gabe said in her ear, bringing her back to the present. "And she will. I promise I'll talk to her." What went left unsaid was, again. He'd talk to her again. And what Dani didn't respond with was, "It won't do any good." They both knew it wouldn't. "Jenna needs her," she said instead. "I know," he bit out. "And you do too." But she wouldn't say those words. That would really set him off. He'd been snapping at her for weeks, a situation